The scrape of a chair echoed as the lawyer paused reading my father's will and tying my name to a DNA test. I'm Gideon Hale in my 50s, COO of a family business. The silver pen gleamed on the polished table as whispers spread. What would you do if your legacy was questioned in public? The lawyer's throat caught on a syllable, and the pause hung heavier than the winter air that seeped in through the window frame. My name came last, tethered to a condition that stripped it of weight DNA confirmation, as though 25 years in the company and 52 on this earth weren't proof enough. The scrape of his chair echoed in the paneled office. I stared at the silver pen resting on the polished table. Its metal gleamed against the dark grain accusing in its stillness. The smell of leather-bound ledgers mixed with the faint hum of the radiator, and for a moment I felt less like a son in mourning than a defendant waiting for judgment. The lawyer droned on about estates and trusts. My sister Clara adjusted her crimson scarf, the color too bright for the occasion, her lips pressed into a rehearsed pout. She knew where the cameras would be later. Even grief in her hands was a performance. My mother Elaine sat perfectly poised in her black dress, every gesture practiced, yet her hand trembled when she folded it in her lap. She had built her life on composure, but today the mask cracked in ways she didn't intend. When the words reached me, conditional upon DNA, the room seemed to shrink. My chest tightened, breath-catching. Clara's glance slid toward me, a spark of satisfaction flickering in her eyes. I had faced audits, union disputes, late-night negotiations with suppliers who swore they'd walk, but nothing prepared me for the weight of suspicion delivered in legal ink. The estate division continued his voice droning, but the sound blurred. I could only hear the faint ticking of the wall clock and my own heartbeat pounding like a fist against my ribs. The pen on the table caught a glint from the overhead lamp, its shine too sharp, and I had the irrational thought that it was laughing at me. Elaine leaned closer, her perfume faint under the musk of old paper. "Just a formality," she whispered, but her hand, when it brushed mine, shook with the effort of denial. The tremor betrayed what she refused to say aloud, that my father, even in death, had left behind doubt sharp enough to cut through decades. My throat locked. I swallowed against the rising heat of humiliation, eyes fixed on the grain of the table, tracing the grooves with my vision, as though I could vanish into them. Rage itched beneath my skin, but I swallowed it knowing rage in this office would be no more dignified than a child's tantrum. Clara's smirk landed harder than any shouted word. She crossed her legs bracelet, chiming softly, and adjusted her posture for an imaginary lens. The gesture said more than she ever would. She had already won the narrative. My silence only tightened the knot she intended to hang around me. The lawyer closed the folder at last, the clap of leather against paper reverberating in the hush. I felt as though the air itself had been thinned, my presence reduced to a clause in an old man's will. And then, as the chairs scraped back and coats were gathered, my phone buzzed against the wood. The vibration rattled the pen beside it. The subject line glowed clinical on the screen paternity report. My fingers hesitated over the device. For an instant I saw my reflection in the glass, creased eyes, hair flecked with gray, a man whose bloodline was now a question mark. The pen gleamed beside the phone, waiting for my choice. I drew in a breath, cold and sharp, the smell of waxed wood filling my lungs, and reached for the phone. The headline appeared first on my phone, the kind of grainy screenshot that spreads faster than fact. "Not every heir is real family." Clara had typed it herself, punctuated with a laughing emoji, and within an hour it was reposted on half the feeds in Richmond. By the time I stepped into the headquarters lobby, the words had already branded me. The lobby smelled of roasted coffee drifting from the corner cart, but even that familiar comfort felt bitter. Conversations hushed as I passed. The click of my shoes on the marble floor echoed too loud against the whispering chorus. Eyes lifted from screens only to dart away as though staring would make their complicity too obvious. A folded copy of the Richmond Business Journal sat abandoned on a side table. Its headline screamed, "Legacy in Question." The paper's ink still smudged my fingers when I picked it up. Rumors had left the realm of gossip. They were now recorded in black and white, archived for future reference. I kept walking, phone vibrating in my pocket with new notifications. The memo had leaked company-wide. An internal note from HR about reviewing governance structures in light of pending verification. Cold, sterile words, yet every employee who read them knew exactly what they meant. Gideon Hale, COO, was under suspicion. Clara intercepted me near the elevators. Her lipstick was a shade too bright for office hours, her smile polished to camera-ready shine. She touched my sleeve lightly, a gesture meant to signal concern. "Ignore the noise, brother," she cooed, eyes darting toward the cluster of junior staff nearby. "People just want clarity. Step back for a while. Let the process run its course." The hum of the elevator machinery vibrated through the marble floor as I met her gaze. Step back. My voice stayed low, but the words carried. "You mean surrender the narrative to you?" Her smile tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Don't be so defensive," she whispered, her tone dripping sympathy loud enough for onlookers to overhear. Then louder, for the benefit of the gossiping chorus. "Family comes first. Right?" She stepped into the arriving elevator, reporters trailing her laughter light, and rehearsed. I stood in the sudden quiet. She left behind the doors, closing with a final chime. My reflection wavered in the polished steel panel. Gray eyes, jaw tight. Suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. Around me, whispers rose again as if her exit had given them permission. The PR manager, pale and sweating, shuffled past with a folder clutched to his chest. He mumbled something about damage control and avoided my eyes. The phrase clung to me like a stain. My phone buzzed again, screen glaring up a message from the family lawyer. "Samuel Kerr has been asking about you. He'd like a meeting." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight heavier than any gavel. The first thing I noticed wasn't Samuel's face, but the steady tick of his pocket watch. Each beat sounded louder than his voice, as if time itself wanted me to listen. He placed the watch on the desk between us, the chain curling like a question mark on the polished wood. "Timing is everything," he said, and the sunlight catching on the glass face made the second hand glint. His office smelled faintly of old tobacco and warm varnish. Files leaned precariously in towers along the wall, their edges yellowed dust motes drifting in the sunbeam that cut across the room. Secrets lay dormant in those stacks, but the air hinted they were still alive. I slumped into the leather chair opposite him. My throat felt raw from nights of silence, of watching Clara's words spread through screens I couldn't control. "You saw the headlines," I muttered. "You saw the memo. Maybe I should just—" Samuel's hand sliced the air, firm but calm. "No. This is not retreat. This is a test." His eyes sharp despite his years locked onto mine. "Humiliation is the forge. If you walk away now, you prove them right. I wanted to argue to say I was tired, that 52 years of carrying this family's name should have been enough proof. But then he slid a thin folder across the desk. Its paper edges scratched against the wood as I pulled it closer. Inside lay a memo dated 15 years earlier. Clara's supposed timeline and appearance at a company gala with our father contradicted travel records tucked behind it. A trip he had taken abroad signed by his own hand, notarized. The discrepancy was small, but in the brittle light of that office it glowed. I exhaled slowly. The hum of the clock filled the silence louder now. This doesn't prove anything by itself. No, Samuel said, leaning back, but it tells us where to look. It tells us patience has a direction. He slid the pocket watch toward me, the chain cool when I picked it up. Its weight surprised me, denser than I expected, as if years of waiting had been stored inside. My first instinct was to put it back, to reject the symbolism, but instead I closed my fist around it. The heaviness steadied my pulse. For a moment I considered surrender, letting Clara win her performance while I slipped quietly into irrelevance. But the tick of the watch argued otherwise, each beat insisting endurance. Samuel's assistant appeared in the doorway, a silent shadow carrying another stack of files. She placed them carefully, her glance lingering on me, sympathetic yet expectant. She left without a word, but her silence echoed, "You have a choice." At the bottom of the folder, half hidden beneath memos, a line caught my eye. It referenced a comparative record DNA notes, maternal linkages that didn't align with Clara's story. My hand froze mid-turn. The words implied something I had never dared to imagine. Clara might not be my father's daughter at all. The watch ticked on, steady and merciless. Rain smeared the glass wall of the boardroom, each streak catching the fluorescent light until the whole city outside blurred into watery shadows. Clara's voice cut clean through the static of the air conditioner. "He's unstable, unfit to carry this company forward." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her tone sliced with surgical precision, practiced for cameras even when none were present. I tightened my grip on the edge of the table. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, a faint hum underlining my silence. I had come to prove my competence, to remind the board that 2 decades of service outweighed a viral headline. Instead, I found myself drowning in her performance. She slid a packet across the table. Payroll discrepancies cherry-picked from old audits. Negligence, she called it, letting the word hang. A pattern of recklessness. A murmur ran through the room, the smell of wet asphalt drifting in from the vents, as though the storm outside had crept in to witness. I opened my folder, counterpoints ready, but my words caught. The numbers blurred my rebuttal, stumbling like a rookie speech. Halfway through my explanation, one of the board members checked his phone, and I knew Clara had already leaked something. The confirmation came seconds later. Another member raised her screen, a push alert from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Family feud at Blake Technologies CEO's son under review. The headline stared back at me from across the polished mahogany. Even mid-meeting, the narrative had escaped. A bead of sweat slid down my spine despite the cold hum of the air conditioning. These figures are misleading. I tried again, but the conviction in my voice cracked. Clara leaned back, folding her arms, her confidence glowing brighter than the artificial light. Then it happened. The silver pen my father's rolled slowly toward the edge of the table, disturbed by the shuffle of papers. Time stretched. I reached too late. It slipped, struck the tile with a dull crack. The sound echoed small but final, as though something more than metal had fractured. Elaine flinched. She hadn't spoken the entire meeting, but her hand went to her pearl's knuckles white. The board turned eyes toward me, not toward her. To them, I was the man who had just dropped the legacy literally. The chairman cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, perhaps it's best we place interim trust in Clara's leadership while matters resolve. Nods followed. My chest tightened, the storm outside rattling the glass as though applauding my defeat. Clara's lips curved just enough to flash victory. She leaned toward the mic, her voice sweetened. We all want what's best for the company. I sat frozen humiliation, cold as the rain. Then, beside me, Samuel leaned in, his words barely a breath. We dig deeper. The storm hammered harder against the glass, the fluorescent buzz swallowing my silence. The glow of the laptop screen lit the cramped apartment, a harsh square of blue against the dim autumn dusk. My cursor hovered, trembling slightly, as though it knew more than I did. Schedule send. The words glowed, daring me to press. The pocket watch on my desk ticked like a metronome, each second louder than the last. Samuel had placed it there hours ago, a reminder that patience wasn't passive. It was measured. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air, stale and acrid, mixing with the paper musk of HOA notices and unpaid bills scattered like collateral damage around me. Samuel sat across the table, sleeves-rolled glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He wasn't watching the screen. He was watching me. You don't win by speed, Gideon, he said softly. You win by precision. His words had the calm cadence of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, each syllable weighed like currency. Beside him, a young consultant tapped quietly at a keyboard, scanning PDFs into neat folders. He didn't speak, but the muted clack of keys was its own reassurance. Emails time-stamped, Slack logs, preserved county clerk records, notarized, all slotted into what Samuel called the evidence pack. I added my own piece of video testimony recorded in one take, voice steady, though my palms had sweated. On screen, I spoke of service of decades in the company of the truth that could no longer be denied. I saved the file, dragging it into the folder, watching the icon settle, as if it carried the weight of my entire history. The watch ticked. The smell of coffee thickened. I adjusted my tie, though no one was watching. The auto email template was ready, subject line blank. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. Then I typed, Legacy Review, do not ignore. The phrase blinked back at me, sterile but final. I attached the folder, triple-checked the files. Samuel leaned closer, scanning, then gave one nod. The hesitation surged back at the last moment. My thumb hovered over the mouse. Once I clicked, there was no retreat. The silence in the apartment pressed closer, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the watch. I closed my eyes, drew in the smell of stale coffee, and clicked. The screen flashed confirmation scheduled for delivery, 9:00 a.m. board session. I leaned back, breath leaving in a rush, heart pounding like I'd crossed a finish line alone. On the screen, the subject line blinked again, merciless and unavoidable. Legacy Review. Do not ignore. Clara strode onto the stage as though she had rehearsed for this moment her entire life. And maybe she had. The auditorium lights blazed down, heating the air until the faint smell of hairspray seemed to cling to every breath. A red light blinked at the back of the room, camera live audience in the tens of thousands and climbing by the second. I sat at the long table with the board. The hum of microphones feeding back faintly, a reminder that anything I said could be clipped, looped, and weaponized. Clara's smile widened as she leaned into her mic. Ladies and gentlemen, Blake Technologies deserves steady hands. My brother has struggled. She let the word hang like perfume sweet and poisonous. The crowd murmured restless coughs, punctuating the silence. Screens on the side walls scrolled live stream comments faster than eyes could catch unfit. Lost cause. She's right. The words bled together, yet each cut sharp. I straightened in my chair, forcing my voice steady. Our legacy isn't measured by rumors. It's measured by records, by work delivered by Clara's laugh, interrupted light but practiced. Records. You mean the ones under review? She flicked her wrist and the camera zoomed to catch her expression. She didn't need evidence, she needed rhythm, and she owned the beat. Heads in the audience nodded, not in agreement with her facts, but in submission to her confidence. Then a vibration rippled through the room. Phones buzzed, screens lit. My scheduled email had landed. Board members glanced down at their devices, brows furrowing as attachments opened. A rustle passed like wind through wheat. For a moment, confusion bent the current. But the live stream didn't stop. Comments piled faster. Desperate move. Too late. He's flailing. I caught Elaine in the front row. My mother's hands were clasped, knuckles white, her eyes locked on Clara, as if begging her to show mercy she had no intention of offering. Ladies and gentlemen, Clara continued, voice smooth, this company can't afford instability. My brother's judgment falters when we need clarity most. The applause rose, not thunderous, but enough to sting. Cameras zoomed tight on her smile, capturing the angle of triumph. I felt the sweat bead under my collar, the heat of the stage lights pressing harder. My auto-sent truth had landed, but truth doesn't sprint. It takes the long road. Clara had already seized the present, turning doubt into a weapon sharper than any memo. The moderator, his tie askew, leaned into his mic. Tomorrow, final evidence review. Public session. The words slammed like a gavel. Clara's grin never faltered. The red light at the back camera blinked again, steady, relentless, like a warning siren that no one else seemed to hear. The marble floor echoed each of my steps as I crossed to the podium. The hall was filled to its edges, employees, journalists, the board, and more eyes online than I could ever count. My hand trembled once before I steadied it, placing the repaired silver pen on the podium where all could see. Its surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights, no longer cracked but whole again. Samuel caught my gaze from the side of the room. He gave a single nod, his pocket watch ticking in his palm. Each beat seemed to sync with my pulse. The faint scent of printer ink hung in the air, carried from the stacks of documents laid out for evidence. Murmurs rolled like waves across the hall until I spoke. Blake Technologies was built on trust. I began, my voice carrying further than I expected. And trust cannot survive in shadows. Today I bring what cannot be dismissed, records, reports, truths inked into the history of this company. I opened the folder, sliding DNA results onto the screen overhead. Clerk records followed, notarized and dated. Emails with timestamps appeared in sequence, each one another brick in the wall I had rebuilt. Clara stood, her smile brittle. Fabrications, she snapped, though her voice wavered. Cameras swung to catch her expression, and the crack in her confidence widened. None of this proves enough, Elaine whispered, barely audible, then louder, breaking through the swell of noise. Her hand shook as she rose from her chair. Pearls at her neck trembled against the microphone's buzz. Edward suspected. I lied to him. I lied to both of you. Her confession cracked through the hole like thunder. Gasps rose, flashbulbs popped in rapid bursts. Clara's denial dissolved on her lips. She reached for her notes but found nothing to hold. Her voice caught, then vanished. The board chair lifted a sheet of paper, the sound of it rasping against the mic. Effective immediately, he read voice firm despite the storm in the room. Gideon Hale is reinstated to his position with full authority and recognition of his rightful standing. Applause erupted, not tentative, but swelling, rising, until the marble beneath my feet seemed to vibrate. The silver pen caught the light gleaming, repaired in my hand, as I lifted it briefly, not as a weapon, but as proof that broken things can be made whole. Flashbulbs strobed across the hall as I stepped down, chest heavy with relief, the noise of clapping and cameras chasing me like surf at my back. The office felt smaller than I remembered, though nothing had moved. The applause from the hall still echoed in my ears, yet here the silence pressed heavier than any ovation. I closed the door behind me, blinds drawn halfway, slivers of late autumn light striping the floor. The scent of burnt paper lingered from the trash bin, acrid, clinging to my clothes like smoke after a fire. Samuel placed his pocket watch gently on the desk. The chain coiled into a neat circle, the ticking steady as his words. "Every battle leaves a wound," he said. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with the gravity of someone who had seen too many wars fought in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. Elaine sat on the couch posture, collapsed, her once immaculate elegance unraveling. She wept quietly into a handkerchief, the pearls at her throat dull in the lamplight. "I ruined everything," she whispered, voice fractured. "I lied to him, to you, to myself." The blinds snapped faintly in the draft, punctuating her confession. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but anger and exhaustion twisted together, holding me still. Clara's absence filled the room louder than Elaine's sobs. Her social media had gone dark overnight. Profiles deleted, appearances cancelled. Silence had replaced her spotlight, and in that silence I felt no triumph, only emptiness. Samuel leaned forward. "This is where you choose. Revenge or purpose." His words settled between us like a gavel. He slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. "Sketch it. What comes after?" The pen in my hand shook, but I began to write "The Blake Foundation for Families of Fallen Workers." The words steadied me, each line of ink an act of repair. Samuel watched, nodding once approving without a smile. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the memo that had haunted me for months, its watermark still faint under the desk lamp. The document had been Clara's weapon, leaked to humiliate, to erode. I struck a match, held the corner of the page until flame raced across. The smell of burning ink filled the office, smoke curling before the vent drew it away. Ash scattered into the trash bin where other fragments lay. Closure by fire. The silence deepened after the last ember died, but it felt different now. Not oppressive, but clearing. A cough drifted from the hallway, someone lingering beyond the door waiting for direction. I straightened the weight in my chest, loosening. My phone buzzed. A message from the board press event scheduled foundation announcement next quarter. I exhaled, closing my eyes, the ticking of Samuel's watch syncing with my pulse. The wounds were real, but so was the path forward. Banners stretched across the front of the Richmond Community Center, their fabric bright against the deep blue of a summer sky, the Blake Foundation. Children clustered along the stage steps, their laughter rising above the hum of the crowd. The hall smelled faintly of paper programs, but the stronger scent drifted in from outside barbecue smoke, curling through open doors, the kind of smell that made the day feel like a holiday. I touched the silver pen in my pocket. It no longer felt cold or fragile. Warm from my hand, it carried not accusation, but continuity. The sunlight poured through tall windows, scattering across rows of chairs, filled with families, veterans' neighbors, people who had never cared for corporate titles, but who understood service and sacrifice. Samuel stood at the side, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't need to speak. His quiet presence was its own benediction. The board members sat in the front, their expressions more subdued than triumphant. This event wasn't about them. I stepped to the podium, papers waiting. My voice carried into the space steadier than in any boardroom. The Blake Foundation will serve families of workers who gave everything and were too often forgotten. Legacy is not wealth. Legacy is responsibility. Applause rippled through the room, soft at first, then swelling. Children climbed the steps to join me, one tugging gently at my sleeve. Eyes wide as though this stage belonged to him too. Their presence grounded me more than any vote of reinstatement ever had. From the back row I felt my mother's gaze. Elaine sat alone, posture smaller than I remembered her pearls, catching the sunlight faintly. She did not speak, but her silence was not resistance this time, it was surrender. Samuel's smile was quiet, almost hidden, but I caught it. The kind of smile that said a mission had been completed not with noise, but with endurance. I drew the pen from my pocket. Its weight settled into my hand as I bent over the charter. The scratch of ink against paper echoed louder than the microphone, a sound amplified by the stillness of those watching. The room erupted in cheers as I lifted the signed charter. Children clapped beside me, their voices high, their hands sticky with barbecue sauce from plates outside. I leaned closer to the mic, but the words weren't for them. They were for me, and for the man who had tested me even from the grave. Honor is tested in silence. I whispered the phrase, no longer his judgment, but my own. The sunlight lingered, the banners stirred in the warm air, and the foundation was no longer just an idea on paper. It was a community, rising a legacy shared. The polished tables still carried the faint smell of waxed wood as I brushed my thumb over the seam, where the silver pen had once been cracked, now smooth again. In that small gesture I felt how dignity returns not through revenge, but through the choice to repair and share. Justice had been served, yet what lingered was not triumph, but the quiet knowledge that every fracture can become a line of strength. A local newsletter posted a short note about the Foundation's first grants proof that legacy can outgrow scandal. We all face losses, jobs, trust, even family ties, but there is always a way back through purpose. What cracks in your life might be waiting to be mended into something greater.